For 3 years, my sister-in-law, Laura, and I had a babysitting arrangement that worked flawlessly. We started it back in early 2020 when the pandemic turned everything upside down. She'd watch my kids 3 days a week, and I'd watch hers 3 days. No money exchanged hands, no drama, just an agreement that benefited us both. If something came up, we'd give each other plenty of notice. It was mature, respectful, and reliable. Until it wasn't. A couple of weeks ago, Laura and I had a stupid argument. Honestly, I can't even remember what it was about because it was that petty. I figured she'd get over it in a day or two, and I didn't think much of it. The next morning, I dropped my kids off at her house like I'd done dozens of times before. Our routine was simple. I'd pull up, let the kids out of the car, and she'd wave from the door. Sometimes we didn't even talk, especially if one of us was in a rush. That morning was no different. I saw the door open, the kids ran inside, and I waved before heading off to work. My commute is about 40 minutes, and during that time, I zone out with music and focus on mentally prepping for the day. When I finally parked and checked my phone, my stomach dropped. 20 missed calls. Over a dozen texts. All from Laura. The messages started off snarky. "I told you I'm not watching your kids today after what happened yesterday." Then they escalated. "Why are you ignoring me? Are you seriously doing this right now?" And then the final ones hit me like a truck. "If you don't come get your kids in the next 45 minutes, I'm calling the police." I felt sick. My hands were shaking as I dialed her number. She picked up immediately, her voice sharp and cold. "Do you think I'm joking, Amanda? You have 45 minutes. I'm not playing games with you." I tried to explain. My phone had been on silent while I was driving. I hadn't seen her messages. I was at work and would leave immediately. But she cut me off. "You have 45 minutes, or the cops are getting involved. Here's the thing. I work with kids for a living. Anything involving child neglect or abandonment on my record would ruin my career." Laura knew that, and she still made the threat. I rushed to tell my boss what was happening. Thankfully, she was understanding and let me leave right away, but even with her support, I couldn't just drop everything instantly. By the time I pulled up to Laura's house, it had been just over an hour since her final message. 2 police cars were parked in the driveway, lights flashing. My kids were standing on the porch with wide, scared eyes. Laura was there too, arms crossed, talking to one of the officers with the most self-satisfied look I've ever seen on her face. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to yell until my voice was raw, but I knew I couldn't. Instead, I took a deep breath, walked up to the officers, and tried to explain. "This is a misunderstanding," I said as calmly as I could manage. "I didn't abandon my kids. I dropped them off here every week. I didn't see her messages saying she couldn't watch them until I was already at work. The moment I saw them, I called and came straight here." One of the officers gave me a tired look, like he'd heard 1,000 excuses before. "You didn't see her messages?" "No," I said firmly. "My phone was on silent while I was driving. I called her as soon as I saw them and told her I was on my way." Laura jumped in, her voice sharp. "I told you I couldn't watch them today. You should have checked your phone before leaving them here. This is on you." I felt rage bubbling under my skin, but I held it back. "Laura, that's not an excuse to call the police on me. You know what this could have done to me, to my career. You know I work with kids." She shrugged. Actually shrugged. Like it was nothing. The officers exchanged glances. One of them finally said, "This sounds like a communication issue. There's no crime here, so we're not filing a report. Just make sure this doesn't happen again." And then they left. I gathered my kids, put them in the car, and didn't say another word to Laura. But of course, she couldn't help herself. As I walked away, she called out, "Maybe next time you'll check your phone. This is your fault, Amanda, not mine." I slammed my car door and drove away. The whole way home, my kids were quiet. They could tell something was wrong, and I was doing everything I could to hold myself together. The following days felt like a blur. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the police cars, my scared kids, and Laura's smug face. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew the consequences, and she still did it. A few days later, she texted me, "Hey, I think I might have overreacted. Can we go back to the old babysitting arrangement?" I stared at that text for so long my vision blurred. Did she actually think we could just go back to normal? No, Laura, I replied. We're not going back to anything. You called the police on me. You put my career and my family at risk, and you didn't care. I'm not babysitting your kids ever again. Figure it out. She fired back almost immediately. If you had just checked your phone, this wouldn't have happened. I warned you, Amanda. I would have handled it differently if I were in your position. I couldn't believe the nerve. You're out of your mind if you think this is my fault. You crossed a line, and I'm done with you. I blocked her number after that. I thought it would be the end of it. It wasn't. A few days after I blocked Laura, I thought the worst was over. I figured she'd stew in her own frustration for a while, and then eventually move on. But I underestimated how far she and my brother Jason would go to paint me as the villain in all of this. It started with Jason calling me. He's usually pretty laid back, the kind of guy who avoids confrontation at all costs. But this time, he was furious. Amanda, what the hell is wrong with you? Why are you blowing this out of proportion? Laura apologized, and you're still acting like this is some kind of betrayal. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Jason, she called the police on me. Do you understand how serious that is? My entire career could have been destroyed because she decided to be petty over a stupid argument. She was upset, he snapped back, like that somehow excused everything. You could have just checked your phone. None of this would have happened if you'd paid attention. That was the moment I realized Jason wasn't just defending Laura. He genuinely thought I was at fault. Jason, I've explained this. I didn't see the messages because I was driving. And the second I saw them, I called her. What else was I supposed to do? Teleport back in time? He let out an exasperated sigh. You're really going to let this ruin everything? Laura had to quit her job because we can't afford childcare now. You don't even care about what this is doing to us, do you? No, Jason, I said firmly. I don't care, because this isn't my problem. You two made this mess, and now you're mad because I'm not willing to clean it up for you. He called me selfish, said I was being petty, that I was tearing the family apart. I hung up on him before he could say anything else. Then my mom got involved. She called me later that evening, her voice soft and tired. Amanda, sweetheart, can we talk for a minute? I already knew where this was going. If this is about Laura and Jason, Mom, I'm not interested. She hesitated. Honey, they're struggling. Laura's not working anymore, and Jason's doing everything he can to keep things afloat. They need help. I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to keep my voice steady. Mom, Laura called the police on me. Do you understand what that means? Do you know what could have happened if the officers hadn't believed me? I could have lost my job, my reputation, everything. And now you're asking me to just forgive and forget? She sighed. I'm not saying what she did was right. But families forgive, Amanda. We have to stick together. No, Mom, I said firmly. Families don't do what Laura did. And honestly, I'm done being guilt-tripped over this. If they're struggling, that's on them, not me. The conversation ended awkwardly, and I could tell she was disappointed. But I wasn't backing down. For a while, things were quiet. I assumed Jason and Laura had finally accepted that I wasn't going to cave. But instead of facing their own problems, they decided to dump them onto someone else, my mom. It started small. Laura would drop the kids off at my mom's house for a few hours while she ran errands. Then it became entire afternoons. Eventually, my mom was watching Laura's kids 3, sometimes 4 days a week. My mom is in her 60s. She's not in bad health, but she's definitely not in the kind of shape where she can chase 2 toddlers around for hours every day. Every time I visited her, she looked more and more exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes, her voice softer and weaker than usual. Mom, this isn't okay, I said one afternoon while helping her clean up after Laura's kids had spent the day destroying her living room. You shouldn't be doing this. You're not their full-time babysitter. She tried to brush it off with a weak smile. It's fine, Amanda. They're my grandkids. I love spending time with them. But it's not just a few hours here and there anymore, I said. It's constant. And you're wearing yourself out. She didn't say anything, but I could tell she knew I was right. The breaking point came a couple of weeks later when I got a call from my mom in the middle of a workday. Her voice was shaky, and she sounded out of breath. Amanda, I don't feel right. My chest is tight. and my head hurts. I dropped everything and rushed over to her house. When I got there, she was sitting on the couch, looking pale and weak. I didn't waste any time. I took her straight to the doctor. Her blood pressure was dangerously high. The doctor told her she needed to reduce her stress levels immediately, or she'd be at serious risk of a stroke. When we got back to her house, I sat her down. Mom, this has to stop. You can't keep doing this for Jason and Laura. It's literally killing you. She started crying. But Amanda, they need help. They don't have anyone else. They have each other, I said firmly, and they have to figure it out. This isn't your responsibility. The next day, I made sure I was at my mom's house when Laura showed up with her kids. She walked in all cheerful, her kids trailing behind her, and said, "Hey, Mom, I'll be back around 6. "No, Laura," I said, stepping in before my mom could respond. "You won't. You're not leaving your kids here today, or any other day. Mom just got out of the doctor's office because of her blood pressure, and this is not happening anymore." Laura froze, her fake smile disappearing in an instant. "What are you talking about? Mom loves watching them." "No, Laura," I said, crossing my arms. "She's too nice to tell you no, so I'll say it for her. You're not dumping your kids here anymore. Figure it out." Laura's face turned red. "You don't get to make that decision, Amanda. This is between me and Mom. Actually, it's about Mom's health, and I'm not standing by while you run her into the ground." Laura huffed, muttered something under her breath, and stormed out with her kids. My mom looked horrified, but I could see the relief in her eyes too. I thought that might finally be the end of it, but Laura wasn't done yet. I wish I could say that confrontation with Laura was the end of it, that she finally got the message and stopped using my mom as her personal babysitter. But people like Laura don't back down that easily. The very next week, my mom called me, her voice hesitant and apologetic. "Amanda," Laura dropped the kids off again. She said she had an emergency and didn't have anyone else to call. I felt my stomach tighten with anger. "Mom, we talked about this. You can't keep letting her do this to you." "I know," she said softly, but she was so upset. She said she didn't have any other options. I sighed and pinched the bridge of my nose. My mom's greatest weakness is her kindness. Laura knows this, and she exploits it every chance she gets. That evening, I went over to my mom's house. The kids were still there, running around and making a mess while my mom looked exhausted, barely keeping up with them. When Laura finally showed up, almost an hour later than she said she would, I was waiting for her. She walked in, holding her purse and a coffee cup, like she'd just had a relaxing afternoon. "Oh hey, Amanda. I didn't know you'd be here." I didn't even let her put her fake smile on. "Laura, what the hell are you doing? Mom just got out of the doctor's office because of her blood pressure, and you're still dumping your kids on her like it's nothing." Laura's smile faded, and her face turned defensive. "Amanda, calm down. It was just for a few hours. I had something really important to take care of." "What was so important, Laura? Another trip to Starbucks? A manicure appointment?" Her face flushed. "That's not fair. You don't know what's going on in my life right now." "No, I don't," I shot back. "Because every time something happens, you make it everyone else's problem instead of dealing with it yourself. You've run out of excuses, Laura. This stops now." Laura glanced at my mom, looking for support, but my mom was silent. She was too tired to jump in and defend her. I could see it in her face. She was worn down, emotionally and physically. Laura huffed and rolled her eyes. "Fine, whatever. Come on, kids. We're leaving." She gathered her kids, muttering under her breath the whole time, and slammed the door on her way out. My mom sighed heavily, sinking into her chair. "I'm sorry, Amanda," she said quietly. "I just don't know how to say no to her." I sat down across from her. "Mom, I know you love Laura and Jason, and you love the kids, but you can't keep letting them take advantage of you. It's not fair, and it's not healthy." She nodded slowly, but I could tell she wasn't fully convinced. A few days later, Jason called me. I almost didn't pick up, but I figured I'd give him one last chance to prove he wasn't as spineless as his wife. "Amanda, what are you doing to our family?" he said as soon as I answered. "What am I doing, Jason? Are you serious right now? You cornered Laura at Mom's house like some kind of attack dog. She came home in tears, saying you screamed at her in front of the kids. Oh, give me a break. I didn't scream at her. I told her the truth, that she's running mom into the ground and using her as free childcare because she and you refused to get your act together. You're being dramatic, he said, his voice tight with frustration. No, Jason, I'm being honest. You two have backed mom into a corner because she's too nice to stand up to you. And instead of fixing your own problems, you've decided it's easier to just dump them on her. There was silence on the other end of the line. When Jason finally spoke, his voice was quieter. We're struggling, Amanda. You don't understand how hard this has been for us. I sighed. Jason, I get that it's hard, but it's not mom's responsibility to fix it for you. You and Laura are adults. You need to figure it out yourselves. He didn't respond, and after a moment, he hung up. For a little while, it seemed like maybe, they'd finally gotten the message. But then my mom called me again. Amanda. Laura dropped the kids off and just left. She said she'd be back in a few hours, but that was this morning, and I haven't heard from her since. I could feel my blood pressure rising as she spoke. She just left them there? Without asking you first? Yes, my mom said softly. I didn't know what to do. I was in my car before we even hung up. When I got to my mom's house, the kids were playing in the living room, and my mom was sitting on the couch, looking completely drained. That was it. I'd had enough. I grabbed my phone and called Laura. She didn't pick up, of course, so I left her a voicemail. Laura, you have 30 minutes to come pick up your kids, or I'm calling the police. And unlike you, I'm not bluffing. It didn't take her 30 minutes. She was there in 15, storming into the house with her usual mix of righteous indignation and fake victimhood. What the hell, Amanda? Are you seriously threatening to call the cops on me? You've completely lost your mind. Oh, I've lost my mind? You left your kids with a sick, elderly woman who's been told by her doctor to avoid stress. You didn't ask, you didn't plan, you just left. So yeah, Laura, I'm done playing nice. She tried to argue, to twist things around, but I wasn't listening anymore. I stood my ground until she grabbed her kids and left, still muttering under her breath about how unreasonable I was being. After she left, my mom started crying. Amanda, I hate this. I hate all this fighting. I just want everyone to get along. I sat down beside her and took her hand. Mom, I know this is hard, but you have to stop letting them do this to you. They're not going to stop until you put your foot down. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and I could tell she was trying to be strong. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Laura and Jason weren't done yet, and the fallout from their entitlement was about to get a whole lot worse. For a while, things were quiet. Too quiet. Laura stopped dropping her kids off at my mom's house unannounced, and Jason wasn't blowing up my phone with guilt trips anymore. It felt like a fragile truce, but deep down, I knew it was temporary. People like Laura and Jason don't just roll over and admit they're wrong. They retreat, regroup, and come back with an even more infuriating plan. It started with my mom again. She called me one evening, sounding hesitant. Amanda, honey, Jason came by earlier. He was really upset. He said they're having trouble paying their bills and that Laura's been really stressed. I sighed, already knowing where this was going. Mom, please don't tell me you gave them money. There was a long pause before she admitted, I did. Just a little. They said it was for groceries. My jaw clenched. Mom, they're manipulating you. Jason knows you can't say no, and he's using that against you. They're family, Amanda, she said softly, and I could tell she was starting to cry. I can't just watch them struggle. I rubbed my temples, trying to keep calm. I know you love them, Mom, but they're taking advantage of you. They've been doing it for months, and it's only getting worse. You have to set boundaries. She promised she'd talk to Jason, but I didn't have much hope. Sure enough, over the next few weeks, Jason and Laura kept showing up at her house. Sometimes with the kids, sometimes just Jason looking pitiful and defeated. My mom kept giving in, watching the kids, handing over money, making excuses for them. One afternoon, I stopped by unannounced. Jason was there, sitting at my mom's kitchen table with his head in his hands while she poured him coffee. He looked up when he saw me, his expression shifting from guilt to irritation in a split second. Oh great, here comes the lecture, he muttered. I ignored him and turned to my mom. Is everything okay here? She looked flustered. Jason was just telling me about some financial troubles they're having. Amanda, they're really struggling. Jason cut in before I could respond. You know what, Amanda? You act like you're so perfect, like you've got everything figured out. But you have no idea how hard things are for us. Laura's exhausted. I'm working as much overtime as I can. We're drowning. I crossed my arms. And whose fault is that, Jason? Because it sure as hell isn't mine or Mom's. You and Laura made your choices, and now you want everyone else to suffer for them. His face turned red, and he slammed his coffee mug down on the table. You think you're better than us, don't you? No, Jason. I think I'm responsible for my own life. And I'm not dragging other people down with me when I screw up. My mom jumped in, her voice shaking. Please, both of you, stop. This isn't helping anyone. Jason stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. You know what? Forget it. I shouldn't have come here. He stormed out of the house, leaving the door wide open behind him. My mom burst into tears the moment he was gone. Amanda, I hate this. I hate the fighting. I just want everyone to be okay. I sat down next to her and took her hand. Mom, I know this is hard, but Jason and Laura are not your responsibility. You've done more than enough for them. It's time they figure things out on their own. She nodded, but I could tell she was still torn. A week later, things escalated again. Laura called my mom, crying hysterically. Apparently, Jason had gotten into an argument with his boss and quit his job on the spot. Now they had no income, no childcare, and no plan. My mom, of course, was panicking. She called me immediately, asking if there was anything I could do to help. Amanda, they're in a really bad place. Jason says they might lose their apartment. What are they going to do? I felt a flash of anger at Jason for being so reckless, at Laura for her constant manipulation, and at my mom for letting them drag her into their mess again. Mom, listen to me carefully. You cannot fix this for them. You cannot give them money. You cannot let them move in here. You have to let them figure this out on their own. She was quiet for a moment before she said, But Amanda, what if they can't? Then they'll face the consequences of their actions, I said firmly. And maybe, just maybe, they'll finally grow up. But, of course, Jason and Laura had other plans. A few days later, I found out from a cousin that Jason and Laura had been telling everyone in the family that I was the reason they were struggling. According to their version of events, I'd turned my back on them during their time of need. I was selfish, cold-hearted, and holding a grudge over one little mistake. The family group chat exploded with opinions. Aunts and uncles weighed in, some siding with me, others scolding me for not being more forgiving. One particularly bold cousin even messaged me directly, Amanda, why can't you just let this go? They're family. They need help. I didn't even bother explaining myself anymore. I was done defending my boundaries to people who refused to see the bigger picture. The final straw came when my mom called me late one night. She sounded exhausted, her voice trembling. Amanda, Jason showed up tonight. He was drunk. He was yelling about how unfair everything is, about how nobody helps him, and about how he's tired of all of this. I closed my eyes, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. Did he hurt you, Mom? No, she said quickly, but he scared me. He wouldn't leave until I told him I'd talk to you. That was it. I'd had enough. I told my mom to lock her doors and call me if he ever showed up like that again. Then I called Jason. When he answered, his voice was slurred, and he sounded like he was barely awake. Amanda, you don't understand. Everything's falling apart? No, Jason, you don't understand. You've crossed every line imaginable. You've manipulated Mom, dragged her into your mess, and now you're showing up drunk in the middle of the night scaring her? Enough. I'm done. Mom's done. You and Laura need to figure this out without us. He tried to argue, but I hung up. The next day, I drove to my mom's house and sat down with her. Mom, you have to cut them off completely. No more money. No more babysitting. No more guilt tripping. You deserve peace, and they are never going to give it to you. She cried, but she agreed. And for a moment, I felt like maybe, just maybe, things would finally start to change. But of course, Jason and Laura weren't done yet. A week passed without any drama, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe it was over. My mom wasn't babysitting, Jason wasn't showing up unannounced, and Laura had gone completely silent. But if I've learned anything through this mess, it's that silence with people like Jason and Laura is never a sign of peace. It's just the calm before the next storm. It started with a text from my Aunt Cheryl. "Amanda, I don't know what's going on between you and Jason, but he told me you threatened to call the police on them. Is that true?" I felt my face get hot as I stared at the message. I typed back quickly, "Yes, Cheryl, because Laura did it to me first. I wasn't bluffing, and I stand by it." No response. I didn't expect one. I knew exactly what was happening. Jason and Laura were building their little pity campaign again, and this time they were bringing the extended family into it. Over the next few days, I started getting more messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in months. Some were polite but nosy, others outright hostile. "Family helps family, Amanda. You're better than this. Do you really want your mom to live with all this tension? Life's too short for grudges." I ignored most of them, but I couldn't stop the anger boiling inside me. Jason and Laura were running around playing the victims while my mom was still dealing with the emotional fallout of their mess. Then one evening, my mom called me in tears. "Amanda, Jason and Laura are fighting again. He stormed out of their apartment, and he's on his way here." My stomach dropped. "Mom, did you tell him he could stay with you?" She hesitated. "I didn't know what to say, Amanda. He sounded so upset. I couldn't just turn him away." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. "Mom, listen to me. You are not responsible for fixing their marriage. If he shows up drunk again, or if he starts yelling, you call me immediately. And if it gets bad, you call the police. Do you understand me?" She agreed, but I could hear the fear in her voice. Jason showed up at my mom's house an hour later. He wasn't drunk this time, but he looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes, unshaven, his clothes wrinkled like he'd been sleeping in them. My mom let him in, made him tea, and listened while he ranted about Laura. Apparently, their financial situation had gotten even worse. Jason had found a part-time job, but it wasn't enough to cover their bills. Laura was refusing to go back to work, saying she couldn't handle the stress of balancing the kids and a job. Their marriage was hanging by a thread, and now Jason was looking for anyone, to blame. When I went over the next morning to check on my mom, Jason was still there, sprawled on the couch, snoring. My mom was in the kitchen, quietly making coffee. "Did he say when he's leaving?" I asked her. She shook her head. "No, he said he just needs a few days to clear his head." I sat down across from her. "Mom, you know this isn't going to be just a few days, right? He's going to stay as long as you let him. And Laura's going to start dropping the kids off here again the second she realizes Jason isn't coming home." She looked down at her coffee cup, and I could see the exhaustion etched into her face. "I know, Amanda, but what am I supposed to do? He's my son. He's also a grown man," I said firmly, "and it's time he starts acting like one." Sure enough, 2 days later, Laura showed up at my mom's house unannounced with the kids in tow. Jason was still camped out on the couch, playing video games on his phone. My mom let Laura in because, of course, she couldn't say no. When I found out, I drove straight over there. Laura was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone while her kids tore apart the living room. Jason was still in his spot, looking like he hadn't moved in hours. My mom was in the kitchen, looking like she was about to cry. "Everyone stop," I said as I walked in. "Laura, take your kids and go home. Jason, get off your ass and figure out your life. Mom is done being your free babysitter, your free therapist, and your free hotel." Laura immediately went into victim mode. "Amanda, why are you always attacking me? I'm trying my best here." "No, Laura, you're not," I snapped. "Your best is dropping your kids off here whenever you want and disappearing for hours, while Mom wears herself down to the bone taking care of them. Your best is manipulating her into giving you money that she can't afford to lose. So don't stand there and tell me you're trying your best." Jason stood up, his voice low and angry. "You don't get it, Amanda. You have no idea what it's like to be in our position." "You're right, Jason. I don't," I said coldly, "because I don't dump my problems onto other people and then cry about how unfair life is. You two have been given so many chances to fix this, and instead, you've doubled down on being selfish, entitled brats. Laura grabbed her kids and stormed out, muttering under her breath the whole time. Jason stayed silent for a moment before he finally said, "You've made your point." Then he grabbed his bag, walked out the front door, and slammed it behind him. My mom burst into tears the second they were gone. "Amanda, I can't do this anymore. I just can't." I sat down beside her and wrapped my arm around her shoulders. "You don't have to, Mom. It's over. They're not coming back here again." And for a little while, it seemed like maybe that was true. Jason didn't come back, and Laura stopped showing up with the kids. My mom started looking healthier, more rested. She even started going out with her friends again. But if I've learned anything from this entire mess, it's that with people like Jason and Laura, peace is always temporary. They were quiet, sure, but they were also desperate. And desperate people have a way of making things even messier when they realize their safety net is gone. For a while, it actually seemed like Jason and Laura had finally gotten the message. Weeks passed without any phone calls, surprise visits, or guilt trips. My mom started to look more like herself again. Her color came back, she was sleeping better, and she wasn't flinching every time her phone buzzed. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, this mess was behind us. But of course, people like Jason and Laura don't just quietly fade into the background. They were regrouping, and when they came back swinging. It started with my mom getting a message from Laura. Apparently, they were moving. Jason had picked up extra hours at his new job, but it still wasn't enough to cover their rent, utilities, and mounting debt. Laura said they were planning to pack up and move back in with her parents, who lived about 6 hours away. My mom was devastated. She kept saying things like, "I can't believe it's come to this," and "if only we'd found a way to help them sooner." I had to bite my tongue to stop myself from snapping at her. We had tried to help. Over and over again. We tried, and Jason and Laura had thrown every opportunity back in our faces. But my mom's heart was too soft to see it that way. A week before their supposed move, Jason showed up at my mom's house one last time. He didn't bring Laura or the kids, just himself. My mom called me, asking if I'd come over, and I could hear the unease in her voice. I was there within 20 minutes. When I walked in, Jason was sitting at the kitchen table, hunched over with his hands clasped together. He looked rough, like he hadn't slept in days. My mom was hovering near the counter, clutching a tea towel like it was a lifeline. Jason didn't look up when I walked in. He just started talking. "Mom, Amanda, I messed up. I know I did. I should have handled things differently. I should have been better, for Laura, for the kids, for you both." I didn't say anything. Neither did my mom. We just let him talk. "But it's too late now. We can't afford to stay here. Laura's parents said they'll let us move in. But, God, Amanda, I don't want to do this. I feel like a failure." There it was. The pity card. The final Hail Mary attempt to get us to swoop in and fix everything. "Jason," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady, "you're not a failure because you're moving in with Laura's parents. You're a failure because you refuse to take responsibility for the choices that got you here." His head snapped up, and I could see the flicker of anger in his eyes. But he didn't say anything. "You and Laura had every opportunity to make better decisions. You could have worked together, made sacrifices, budgeted your money, stopped relying on other people to solve your problems. But instead, you leaned on Mom until she nearly ended up in the hospital because of it. And now you want her to feel guilty because you have to face the consequences of your own actions? No, Jason, that's not happening." Jason's face crumpled, and for a second, I thought he was going to start crying. But instead, he stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair in the process. "Fine," he said bitterly. "I get it. I'm the bad guy. You win, Amanda." And just like that, he walked out of the house, slamming the door behind him. My mom started crying the second he was gone. I sat down beside her and took her hand. "Mom, I know this hurts, but you have to remember, you didn't fail him. He failed himself. You gave him every chance to do better, and he wasted all of them." She nodded through her tears, but I could tell her heart was breaking. A week later, Jason and Laura officially moved. They didn't tell anyone goodbye. I found out through social media when Laura posted a photo of their packed-up car with some sappy caption about new beginnings and family always sticking together. For the next few months, things were quiet. My mom slowly started to heal, physically and emotionally. She began spending more time with her friends, going to church events, and even taking short day trips with her neighbors. Every time I saw her smiling, genuinely smiling, it felt like a weight was lifting off my chest. Jason and Laura, on the other hand, weren't doing so well. Word started trickling back through family members and mutual friends. Apparently, Laura's parents weren't thrilled about having 2 extra adults and 2 hyperactive kids living under their roof indefinitely. Jason was struggling to hold down a job, and Laura still refused to go back to work. Their marriage was hanging by a thread, and the constant fighting was starting to affect the kids. One of my cousins even mentioned that Laura had been posting vague, passive-aggressive statuses on Facebook about fake family and people who abandon you when you need them most. I rolled my eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. Despite all of that, my mom still felt guilty sometimes. Every now and then, she'd bring them up in conversation, wondering if there was something else she could have done. But I reminded her, again and again, that this wasn't her burden to carry. Months passed, and Jason and Laura faded into the background of our lives. They weren't gone entirely. People like that never really are. But they were far enough away that their chaos stopped seeping into every corner of our world. One evening, I was at my mom's house helping her set up some new shelves in her living room when she stopped and looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Amanda," she said softly. "For what?" I asked, confused. "For standing up to them when I couldn't. For protecting me, even when it made you the bad guy. I don't know what would have happened to me if you hadn't stepped in." I hugged her tightly, feeling my own eyes start to water. "You don't have to thank me, Mom. I'd do it again in a heartbeat." Looking back on everything that happened, I realized there's no happy ending to a situation like this. Jason and Laura didn't magically learn their lesson. They didn't have some grand epiphany and come crawling back to apologize. People like them rarely do. But my mom is healthy. She's happy. And our relationship is stronger than ever. And honestly, that's enough for me.